Hello, my name is Zach Gibbs, and I'm a content developer within education services inside Juniper Networks. And today we will be discussing the Sky ATP SMTP CLI Learning Byte. All right, so here is our example. First, the topology that you see on the left, we first see vSRX1, which is connected to the client zone, which Nancy and Walter, those users, are a part of, and they connect in on Gigi 000. Then we have the email server, which is a part of the server zone, which connects in on Gigi 001 on vSRX1. And then vSRX1 then connects to the internet. So then that way we can submit files to the Sky ATP cloud. All right, so the criteria for this example, vSRX1 is already enrolled with Sky ATP. Users will be using SMTP to send emails to the email server. So we need to configure the following. We need to quarantine malicious messages. Then the recipients can request release of quarantine emails. Then we need to create a custom message, and we need to send email notifications of quarantine emails to the administrator email, which is juniperlbs@gmail.com. So let's go ahead and jump to the Sky ATP web interface to get this started. All right, so here is the Sky ATP web interface. Let's jump to configuration. And then let's jump to SMTP under email management. And then we have some settings that we need to configure. The first action to take setting is already at the default of what we need. We have quarantine malicious messages. We could change that to deliver with warning headers or just permit the messages. We want to quarantine these malicious messages. And then we have the release option, which recipients can release the email on their own if they deem it as a safe email, or recipients can request to release the email. So let's select that second option. And then we need to enter an email address for the users to request the release of that email from. And we'll just use our administrator email that we talked about earlier. And then we have the email notifications for end user section. Here we can put in learn more link URL. So it's a link to find out more information. This is something you would have to maintain as an administrator. And then we have the subject. We can specify the subject. We have a custom message. We can write up a custom message. There's a default one here for you. And it says, dear user, that user is a variable. So it's going to grab the username and put that in there when it sends that custom message. And then we can have a custom link text. This is the link that users can click to view the message in the quarantine portal. And then we need to click save to save our changes. Okay, next we need to add in that administrator email under the administrators who receive email notifications section, so we can receive some notifications about quarantine emails and about release notifications as well. Let's click the create button to add it, and let's add. And then by default, you have the quarantine notification and the release notification options selected. We're going to leave both those selected and click OK. Then let's go ahead and jump to the CLI to configure the rest of this. All right, so here is the CLI for vSRX1. We need to go into configure mode, and then we need to go to the services advanced anti-malware hierarchy. And then we can specify the policy. We're going to name this policy LB-TPP. That's Learning Byte Threat Prevention Policy. That's what that stands for if you're wondering. And then we specify our SMTP parameters. We're going to set the inspection profile to the default profile. That'll work fine. And then we can specify the verdict threshold. We're going to say a 7 for anything that's 7 or above we're going to be concerned about. And so I want to point out that's what we have for the policy. It seems pretty sparse, but keep in mind that you can't configure the actions on the SRX device. So in this regards, we had to first configure the actions and all the stuff we wanted to do in Sky ATP Web UI. So that's why we went there first. Now we're inside the CLI. And we're saying basically use the inspection profile, default profile, use a verdict threshold of 7 as what we're going to denote as what's bad and what's good. So anything 7 or above is what we want to quarantine. And so then after that, we need to associate this threat prevention policy with a security policy. So we're creating a security policy. It's from the client zone to the server zone. So with that regards, we can set the match criteria, set a source address of any, destination address of any, and application of any. Now we could use a dynamic application as well and basically turn this into a unified policy, but it's not necessary for this example. But just keep in mind, you can do that and it's perfectly acceptable. So then we want to set the policy to permit use application services and specify it and advanced anti-malware policy that we just created. And so what's basically going to happen here is we're going to match on anything coming from the client zone to the server zone, and we're going to permit it with the idea of applying that advanced anti-malware policy, or otherwise known as a threat prevention policy. So keep that in mind. You'll see in the JWeb and also in security directory, they'll call that a threat prevention policy. So let's go ahead and commit the configuration and exit to operational mode. Then let's jump to the client device and start sending some emails. Okay, so here is the client device. And one thing I need to point out is that I just have one device for this. And the two emails, the Walter and the Nancy users, their emails will both be on this device. So we can send from the Walter email and receive from the Nancy email on the same device. And I did that to save resources. No reason to fire up two separate devices if I can do it with just one. So let's go ahead and create a new email. This is coming from Walter user. We're going to send it to the Nancy user. And we're just going to put in a bogus subject. We're going to say this email is safe when it's really not, because we're going to add some malicious traffic to it, or rather a malicious attachment. Let's go ahead and send that. All right, that message has been sent with that malicious attachment. Let's click the send and receive button to attempt to receive that email. All right, so we can see that we did receive an email message from Walter, but we get a quarantine notification. So that email was quarantined. So let's go ahead and jump back to the vSRX1 CLI and look at some statistics. All right, so here is the vSRX1 CLI. So let's look at the advanced anti-malware statistics. And we can see some information here. In the first section, the advanced anti-malware session statistics, we can see that we have one session that was permitted, and that one session was SMTP. That's great. Now that might seem a little weird that the session was permitted, but keep in mind the session was fine. It was the attachment that we have a problem with. So then under the advanced anti-malware file statistics section, we can see that there was one file that was submitted successfully, and it was a file that was acquired through SMTP. And then we have under the file verdict meets threshold section, we can see that we have one file that did meet the verdict threshold. So that means that it was a malicious file. That was a file that was 7 or greater. In our case, it's a 10. You'll see that later. And you can see that was with SMTP. And then we go to the bottom under the advanced anti-malware email statistics. You can see that there was one email process that was through SMTP. And we can see that one email was quarantined, and that again was through SMTP. So with that, let's go ahead and jump back to the Sky ATP web interface and have a look at things. All right, so here is the Sky ATP web interface. Let's go ahead and go to the monitor section. Let's go to file scanning, and then let's go to email attachments. And here we can see that we have some email attachments that were pretty bad. Each has a threat level of 10. I've done this test a few times, so that's why you're seeing additional email attachments here, not just one. But we can look at the latest one. We can see that there is a level 10 email attachment that was pretty bad. So let's go ahead and click on that file, or the hash of the file that is. And we can see here some information. We can see the threat level, the top indicators, the prevalence. We see some general information. We can go check out the behavior analysis, the network activity, the behavior details. And then under the SMTP emails, we can see the recipient, the sender, the actual file name, when it was submitted. The vSRX1 device blocked it. Status was blocked, so we didn't release that email. And we can see later on, if we go to the blocked email section and then SMTP quarantine, we can see some additional information. We click the detail view. We can see that quarantine email. We see the current action is set to quarantine. We see the recipient, the sender, the date, the attachment file name, the size, the threat score, things like that. So that gives us the detail view. Now let's jump back to summary view. And this is where you're going to see a summary of what's been happening in your network. And the thing to keep in mind here is this might seem a little weird, because if you look here, you see that under quarantine, it shows a 0. We see some email scan, we see some released, we see some permitted, but nothing quarantined. And the reason behind that is there's a bit of a delay here when it updates this information. So if you send an email, or rather an email sent through, it's got a malicious attachment, the email is quarantined, it's not going to show up here immediately. So you need to give it a bit of time, but you can get some additional information by looking at the summary view. Okay, so back to the detail view, we have some additional actions we can take. We can select the email that is quarantined. And then if you look on the right here, we can see that we can add the domain to blacklist. So we could blacklist that utm.juniper.net domain. We could just add the sender to blacklist, which would be walter@utm.net, or we can release the email. And one final thing is we can delete the email as well. So it just deletes it from Sky ATP. Let's go ahead and release that email. And we can see the action changed from quarantine to released. Then let's go ahead and jump to the email account for that administrator to see those notifications about quarantine and release. Okay, so here is the email administrator account. And we have two different emails. We have a quarantine and a release notification. Under the quarantine notification, we can click that. And we have some information. We have who it was to, who it was from, the file name, the subject, the file size, the threat level. And then we can go to the release notification. That just basically lets us know that the email was released and gives us a bit of information, who it was from, who it was to, the subject, and things like that. So that brings us to the end of this Learning Byte. In this Learning Byte, we demonstrated how to configure Sky ATP SMTP Advanced Anti-Malware functionality using the CLI, and then we demonstrated how to verify that through the CLI as well. So as always, thanks for watching.
Visit the Juniper Education Services website to learn more about courses. View our full range of classroom, online, and e-learning courses. Learning paths, industry segment and technology-specific training paths. Juniper Network's certification program, the ultimate demonstration of your competence. And the training community, from forums to social media. Join the discussion.